I was on my knees fixing a leaking tap when my son-in-law looked down at me and laughed. "Plumbers have no place on yachts like this," he said loudly, just enough for everyone to hear. "You're going to scratch something, old man." The salt air froze in my lungs. I straightened slowly, wiping my hands on a cloth, and met his eyes. He was smiling, the kind of smile men wear when they think they're superior, when they believe the world has already sorted winners from losers. To him, I was a retired nobody pretending to belong somewhere expensive. He didn't know the truth yet. The brass faucet gleamed under the afternoon sun, the yacht rocking gently against the dock. Newport Marina stretched behind us, all polished decks and quiet wealth. My daughter stood beside him, eyes darting between us, saying nothing. Silence can betray just as deeply as words. "I was just helping," I said calmly. He snorted. "Helping? You look like you're working maintenance. Relax. It's a rental. They have people for that." A rental. That single word told me exactly what he thought of me. I had spent 2 months planning this day, 2 months imagining my daughter smiling, realizing her father had done something meaningful, something generous. Instead, I was being reduced to a stereotype, an aging man with tools in his hands trying to look important. He leaned closer, lowering his voice, but not enough. "People like you don't belong in places like this," he said. "You should stick to fishing boats, or better yet, stay on shore." My daughter shifted uncomfortably. She didn't defend me. That hurt more than his words ever could. I looked around the deck, the leather seating, the polished chrome, the compass mounted near the helm. Every inch of it was familiar to me in a way he could never understand. I smiled, not because it was funny, because something inside me finally went quiet. That was the moment I stopped being a forgiving father and became something far more dangerous, a man who understands consequences. He turned away, satisfied, already dismissing me as irrelevant. He had no idea what he'd just done. No idea that the tap he mocked me for fixing was only the first thing that would break that day. No idea that the yacht beneath his feet wasn't rented. And no idea that his arrogance had just cost him more than he could ever afford. I stood there, listening to the water lap against the hull, feeling the calm settle in. Justice doesn't always arrive loud and angry. Sometimes it arrives quietly, with patience, evidence, and perfect timing. And I had all three. I didn't become generous overnight. Generosity was something I learned slowly, one sacrifice at a time, over decades of putting my family first and myself last. When my wife passed away, Lindsay was still in college. I remember sitting at the small kitchen table at 2 a.m, bills spread out in front of me, calculator blinking like it was judging every decision I made. I promised myself one thing that night. My daughter would never feel the weight of my grief or my fear. I would carry it for both of us. Her MBA program came first. She wanted to stay competitive, she said. Tuition was $40,000, spread over 2 years. I wrote every check without hesitation. No loans, no interest, no lectures. I told her education was the one thing no one could ever take away from her. I never mentioned the overtime shifts I picked up. I never mentioned the vacations I didn't take. I never mentioned the watch I wanted but didn't buy. That was just what fathers did. When she married Derek, I paid $25,000 toward the wedding. Flowers, photographer, venue upgrades. I remember Derek shaking my hand that night, calling me sir, thanking me for being so supportive. He looked me in the eye and said, "Well, Never forget this. I believed him. 2 years later, when Derek's business hit a temporary cash flow issue, they needed help with a house down payment. I transferred $60,000 without blinking. I told myself it was an investment in stability, in my daughter's future. Then came the smaller things, the quiet ones. Emergency car repairs, $5,000. Medical bills, Lindsay didn't want to talk about, $3,200. Furniture, just to get started. Appliances, when theirs broke. Holidays, birthdays, anniversaries. I insisted on paying for. By the time I added it all up, I had quietly given them over $140,000 in direct financial support. And I never once asked for recognition. I lived modestly by choice. Same house, same sedan, same routine. I wore comfortable clothes and kept my mouth shut about my finances because money, to me, was a tool, not a personality trait. To Derek, that silence meant weakness. I started noticing the shift after Lindsay married him. Little comments at first. Dad doesn't really get modern finance. He's old school. You don't have to prove anything anymore, Dad, said with smiles, said with laughter, said just gently enough that I could pretend it wasn't disrespect. At dinners, Derek talked about success like it was something you could only earn if you talked loudly enough about it. He bragged about numbers that didn't add up, about clients he never named, about deals that were always about to close. Meanwhile, the man quietly paying their bills sat across the table, invisible. I let it happen. I told myself I was being patient. I told myself marriage was stressful. I told myself love meant endurance. What I didn't realize then was that every unchecked comment, every silent moment, every dollar given without boundaries was teaching Derek something dangerous. It taught him that respect was optional. It taught him that generosity meant entitlement. It taught him that kindness could be exploited. And worst of all, it taught my daughter that silence was easier than loyalty. By the time I bought the yacht, I wasn't trying to show off. I was trying to reconnect. I wanted to give them something meaningful, something shared, something that could rebuild what I felt slipping away. I imagined weekends on the water, conversations without phones, laughter without tension. I imagined my daughter remembering who I was before I became old and out of touch in her husband's eyes. That yacht wasn't about luxury. It was about hope. Standing on that deck, listening to Derek call me a plumber, I finally understood the truth. You can give people everything and still be seen as nothing if you never teach them the cost of what you gave. The decay didn't happen all at once. It never does. It crept in quietly, disguised as jokes, stress, and modern thinking. The kind of erosion that only becomes obvious when it's already too late. At first, it was Derek's tone. He stopped asking my opinion and started correcting me instead. Not openly, not aggressively, just enough to make his point. "You don't really need to worry about that stuff anymore, Ronald," he'd say with a smile. "Retirement changes priorities." Retirement. As if my mind had clocked out along with my job. When I talked about budgeting or saving, he'd chuckle and say things like, "That's old school thinking," or "Money's meant to work for you now, not sit around." Lindsay would nod, not enthusiastically, just enough. That hurt more than I admitted. She used to call me for advice, about life, about work, about people. Slowly, those calls stopped. When she did call, Derek was always in the background, correcting her version of events, finishing her sentences. "Dad worries too much," she'd say. "He means well," Derek would add. And just like that, I was reduced to a well-meaning relic. At dinners, Derek talked about success constantly. Loud success, flashy success, the kind that needed an audience to feel real. He spoke about clients I never met, profits I never saw, deals that were always almost finalized. When I asked simple questions, he waved them off. He wouldn't get it. It's complicated. Complicated was his favorite word. It made him feel superior. I noticed how he talked to waiters, to service workers, to anyone he believed was beneath him. He wasn't cruel, at least not openly. He was dismissive, impatient, entitled. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. Then came the comments about my lifestyle. Why do you still drive that car? You could live so much better if you loosened up. Don't you ever want more? More. He said it like restraint was a flaw, like discipline was a symptom of fear. The worst part wasn't Derek. It was Lindsay. She didn't challenge him. She didn't defend me. She laughed softly when he joked about my clothes, my routines, my simple tastes. Once she said, "Dad's happy living small." Small. I didn't correct her. I should have. I had chosen a modest life because it kept me grounded, because I didn't need applause to feel successful. But in Derek's world, silence meant insignificance. And silence, I learned too late, teaches people how far they can go. The first real crack came months before the yacht trip. Derek made a joke about how people like me didn't understand luxury. He said it smiling. Everyone laughed. I smiled too. That was my mistake. Because every time I let it slide, Derek learned something new. He learned there were no consequences. He learned I wouldn't push back. He learned that respect wasn't required, only tolerated. By the time we stepped onto the yacht, he wasn't testing boundaries anymore. He believed he owned the room, and I was still pretending the house wasn't already on fire. I didn't hear the damage happen at first. I was still below deck, rinsing plates in the galley sink, letting the cold water steady my hands, when something felt off. The faucet resisted my touch. Not stiff, wrong. The kind of resistance that comes from something forced past its limits. Then the water surged. Not a leak, not wear and tear. A violent, uncontrolled stream bursting from the base of the fixture. I shut it off instinctively, heart pounding, and knelt to inspect the damage. The chrome was scratched, deep gouges, fresh and careless. Tool marks, not corrosion, not age. Deliberate. My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with anger. This was something colder, more precise. Footsteps sounded above deck. Derek's voice floated down, casual, almost cheerful. "Everything okay down there?" he called. "These rental boats are always falling apart." Rental. Again. I looked at the damaged faucet, then at my reflection in the polished metal. I understood immediately what had happened and why. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't frustration. This was punishment. He had broken it to humiliate me, to reinforce the story he had been telling himself all day, that I was out of place, pretending, undeserving. When he came down to the galley, his expression was pure performance. "Looks like the valve gave out," he said sympathetically. "Cheap fittings. Happens all the time." I didn't argue. I didn't accuse him. I simply nodded. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Looks that way." Inside, something fundamental shifted. This wasn't about disrespect anymore. This was about character. A man who deliberately damages someone else's property while smiling, while pretending concern, is not stressed. He is revealing himself. I repaired the faucet methodically. Marine fixtures are resilient. They're designed to withstand storms, pressure, abuse. Still, as I replaced the damaged parts, I kept seeing the scratches, proof of intent. When I stepped back onto the deck, Derek was already telling the story for me. "Good thing Ronald knows some basic plumbing," he laughed to the others. "Saved the day." Basic plumbing. I caught my daughter's eye. She smiled weakly, relieved the tension seemed to be passing. But it wasn't passing. It was settling, because at that moment I knew something Derek didn't. The yacht had cameras, not hidden, not secret, installed professionally, covering every interior space except the bedrooms. High definition, time-stamped, silent witnesses. I didn't rush to check them. I didn't confront him. I didn't raise my voice. I let him believe he'd gotten away with it, because the real betrayal wasn't the broken faucet. It was the certainty in his eyes that I was powerless. And that was a mistake men like him always make. I didn't confront Derek right away. I finished repairing the faucet, wiped my hands clean, and returned to the deck as if nothing had happened. Years of business had taught me something valuable. Confrontation without proof is just noise. Derek was relaxed now, too relaxed. He leaned back in his chair, drink in hand, already narrating the story of the faulty rental to anyone who would listen. The confidence in his voice told me everything I needed to know. He believed he had won. I waited until the others drifted toward the bow, distracted by the view and the breeze, before I slipped quietly into the navigation room. The monitors lit up the small space in cold blue light. 8 cameras, every angle, every minute recorded. I scrolled back to the timestamp. There he was. Derek entered the galley alone, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one was watching. At first, he used the faucet normally. It worked perfectly. He turned it on, off, on again. Then his expression changed. He gripped the handle with both hands and twisted hard. Not an accident. Not frustration. Violence. I watched him brace his foot against the cabinet for leverage. His jaw clenched, applying force until the internal mechanism snapped. The sound came through the speakers clearly. Metal grinding. Something breaking. He stepped back and smiled. Not a nervous smile, a satisfied one. Then he wiped away the evidence, cleaned the metal shavings, smoothed his fingerprints, checked the damage like an inspector admiring finished work. I felt nothing in that moment. No rage, no sadness, just clarity. This wasn't a man who lost control. This was a man who enjoyed control. I copied the footage to a drive and slipped it into my pocket. That small piece of plastic weighed more than any argument ever could. When I returned to the deck, Derek looked at me with mock concern. "Everything sorted?" he asked. "Told you those cheap fixtures give out." "Cheap," I nodded. "All fixed." And that was the moment I truly woke up. Not because he lied, but because I finally accepted the truth I'd been avoiding for years. The ally I'd been waiting for wasn't a lawyer. It wasn't family. It wasn't even time. It was evidence. And once you have the truth documented, you don't need to raise your voice. You just wait. I didn't spring the trap immediately. That's the mistake emotional men make. They rush. They want relief. They want validation. I wanted something else entirely. I wanted certainty. Derek continued to play his role perfectly. Concerned, helpful, almost charming. He laughed with my daughter, complimented the view, even offered to pour drinks, careful not to touch anything important this time. He thought the moment had passed. He thought the broken faucet was just another story he could rewrite. I watched him closely, not with anger,
but with interest. Men reveal their true nature when they believe they're safe. Derek believed he was. He leaned against the rail and said casually, "You know, Ronald, you should really let the rental company handle stuff like that next time. No offense, but you don't need to be crawling around fixing things at your age." At your age. I smiled and nodded.
Inside, the math was already done. I knew exactly what I had. Clear video evidence, a confession waiting to happen, an audience that mattered. What I needed now was timing. I fixed the faucet properly, better than before, quietly, professionally. No drama. When Derek later joked about cheap rentals, I simply let him talk. Every word dug his hole deeper. My daughter watched me with a strange expression, confusion maybe, or discomfort. She could sense something shifting, but didn't yet understand what it was. That was part of the trap, too. People who avoid conflict rarely expect consequences. They assume silence means forgiveness. Derek was counting on that. I slipped the USB drive into my jacket pocket and returned to the deck, relaxed, almost content. The wind off the water was cool. The yacht rocked gently beneath us, steady and confident. I let the afternoon stretch. I let Derek grow comfortable. I let him forget the cameras. Because the most effective punishment isn't loud. It's undeniable. And by the time I was ready to speak, there would be no room left for excuses. It starts cautious, tests the room, then grows bold once it senses weakness. Derek had reached the final stage, the part where men believe they are untouchable. With the faucet fixed and no immediate consequences, his confidence returned in full force. He laughed louder. He spoke longer. He positioned himself at the center of every conversation. He leaned against the rail like he owned the yacht, gesturing out at the harbor as if he were giving a tour. "Not bad for a rental," he said. "Some people really go all out to feel important for a weekend." I noticed how he always said it when others were listening. Never directly to me, always about me. That's how cowards operate. He poured himself another drink, expensive scotch he assumed was charged by the hour, and glanced at my shoes. "You know," he said, smiling thinly, "places like this have a certain standard. It's not personal. It's just how the world works." I looked at him calmly. "Is that so?" He nodded, encouraged. "Yeah, you either belong or you don't. Nothing wrong with knowing your lane." My daughter stood beside him, arms crossed. She didn't interrupt. She didn't object. Her silence landed harder than his words. Derek continued, emboldened by the lack of resistance. "Guys like me work our way up," he said. "We build things. We take risks. We don't just coast into retirement and pretend we're part of a world we didn't earn." Pretend. That word again. I realized then that this wasn't just about money or class. It was about power. Derek needed to feel above someone, and he had chosen me. He didn't know that every sentence was being mentally archived, that his confidence was building toward a collapse so complete he wouldn't see it coming. He finished his drink and smiled at me. "No hard feelings, Ronald," he said. "Just reality." Reality. I nodded once, because he was right about one thing. Reality was coming. I waited until everyone was seated, not because I needed permission, but because timing matters. Truth lands harder when there's nowhere to run. Derek was mid-sentence, explaining something about market trends to his father when I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't clear my throat. I simply placed my tablet on the table. "Before we continue," I said calmly, "there's something I need to address." The room stilled. Derek smirked. "This about the faucet again? Ronald, you really need to let that go." I met his eyes. "No, this is about honesty." I tapped the screen once. The video began playing. At first, Derek leaned back, relaxed, confident. He recognized the galley instantly. "That's me washing my hands," he said quickly. "You see? Nothing." Then the moment arrived. On screen, he looked over his shoulder, checked the door, gripped the faucet with both hands, twisted, hard. The sound of metal grinding cut through the silence like bone snapping. His smile vanished. "No," Lindsay whispered. "No, no, no." The footage continued. Derek braced his foot, applied force again. The valve failed. Water burst free. Then came the worst part. The smile. Not panic, not surprise. Satisfaction. I let the video play to the end. Every second, every movement, every attempt to clean up the evidence. When it stopped, I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Derek stared at the frozen image of himself on the screen, his mouth opening and closing without sound. His father spoke first. "What the hell were you thinking?" His voice was low, controlled, dangerous. Derek finally found his voice. "It's not what it looks like. I was trying to break it," I said quietly. "And you succeeded." He shot to his feet. "This is ridiculous. You're acting like I committed a crime." "You vandalized property," I replied, "deliberately. Then you lied about it." Lindsay stood slowly, her face pale. "Derek, why?" He turned to her, desperate now. "I was angry. He was acting like he belonged somewhere he didn't." There it was. Not denial, not remorse, just truth. Too late. I closed the tablet. "Thank you," I said evenly. That's all I needed. The hammer had fallen. Silence filled the cabin, not the awkward kind, the heavy kind, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes every breath feel earned. Derek stood there, frozen, his confidence draining from his face as reality finally caught up with him. The same man who had mocked my shoes, my age, my supposed station in life, now looked like a boy caught stealing. He tried again. "Desperation changes people. Ronald, come on," he said, forcing a laugh that fooled no one. It was stupid, I admitted. "I'll pay for the damage. I'll even apologize. Let's not blow this out of proportion." Out of proportion? I looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "You didn't break a faucet," I said calmly. "You broke the last bit of trust you had." His father stood up slowly, eyes fixed on his son. "You vandalized someone's property," he said. "Then you mocked him for it. Do you have any idea what that says about you?" Derek turned to him, panic creeping into his voice. "Dad, you don't understand. He's been pretending all day, acting like he belongs here." Pretending? I took a step forward. "This is where your story falls apart," I said quietly. I let the words settle before continuing. "This yacht isn't rented." Derek frowned. "What?" "I own it." The color left his face instantly. "I purchased it in March," I continued. 42 feet, paid in full, registered in my name, insured in my name, docked here under my account." The room seemed to tilt. Lindsay's hand flew to her mouth. "Dad, what are you saying?" "I was going to give it to you," I said, looking at her. "Both of you. As a gift. I wanted to surprise you today." Derek staggered back a step. That's not funny." "I'm not joking," I replied. "The yacht is worth just under $3 million. $3 million." His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I kept my life modest because I didn't need approval, I went on. But I've supported you financially for years. Tuition, wedding, down payment, emergencies. Over $140,000. Derek's knees hit the chair behind him. He sat down hard. "No," he whispered. "You didn't tell us." "No," I agreed, "I didn't. And you showed me exactly why that was the right choice." He looked up at me then, eyes wild. "I didn't know. If I'd known, if you'd known I was wealthy," I said evenly, "you would have treated me with respect." He didn't deny it. That was the final collapse. Because in that moment, everyone saw it clearly. Not just the broken faucet, not just the insults, but the conditional respect, the entitlement, the cruelty that only surfaced when he thought there would be no consequences. His father shook his head slowly. "I didn't raise you to be this man." Lindsay was crying now, quietly, the realization hitting her all at once. I took a breath. "The gift is withdrawn," I said simply. "The yacht remains mine. And Derek, you are no longer welcome on it." He started to speak, then stopped. There was nothing left to say. Some losses can't be negotiated. They left quietly. No shouting, no slammed doors, just the soft echo of footsteps moving away from something they no longer deserved. I stood on the deck long after they were gone, watching the harbor settle back into its gentle rhythm. Boats drifted. Flags fluttered. The world kept moving, indifferent to entitlement and ego. William joined me, handing me a glass of wine. "You did the right thing," he said simply. I nodded. Not because it felt good, but because it felt necessary. That evening, I slept better than I had in years. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped losing myself to silence. In the weeks that followed, life grew quieter, simpler, the way I preferred it. I kept the yacht, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a reminder that generosity without boundaries invites disrespect, that kindness without accountability becomes weakness, and that love does not require self-erasure. Lindsay called me once. She didn't ask for the yacht. She didn't ask for money. She asked for time. I told her we could talk slowly, carefully, with honesty this time. As for Derek, I heard very little. His pride wouldn't allow apologies, and without unearned advantages, his world became smaller. That wasn't revenge. That was consequence. On quiet mornings, I sit on the deck with a cup of coffee, watching the compass catch the sunlight, always pointing true north, always steady. Some people mistake humility for insignificance. They are wrong, because real power doesn't shout, it doesn't posture, and it never needs to prove itself. It waits, and when the moment comes, it simply tells the truth and lets the truth do the rest. If this story resonates with you, it's not because of the yacht. It's because many of us have given too much for too long, quietly, lovingly, hoping respect would follow. Let this be your reminder. You can love deeply without being diminished. You can give generously without surrendering dignity. And you can walk away without hatred when boundaries are crossed. Kindness is a gift, not an obligation others are entitled to. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or taken for granted, remember this. Your value does not decrease because someone failed to recognize it. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do
is stop explaining and start choosing peace.